if you read about Italy and other parts of the world. I will share later something in the chat because World Waternet is supporting international partners, other utilities or authorities to work on water cycle management, and drought is one of that. I will share in the chat something about Burkina Faso, where we have a strong partnership with the authorities there, and nature-based solutions is one of the solutions there. So please check it out. The other thing, what you will also see in the chat, is that the session will be recorded. So please keep that in mind with maybe posting questions or share observations. I will introduce 3 amazing speakers. They will do a short presentation of about 10 minutes, and there's 5 minutes for Q&As. Maartje, Carla, Monique will help me and each other to see if there are any posing questions that we need to address. But I think that's the most important thing for me. Looking forward to today. Already 50 people now in the group. So if that's okay with you, then dealing with droughts is sort of opened. And I would like to give the floor to Frederiek. She's working for Deltares, and she will share the significant climate scenarios for discharge in rivers. And she will manage about the aspect of drought on drinking water supply in the Rhine River basin and solutions for that. That will be later by Wolfgang. And the last one by Bettina about solutions in the Cape Town area. And she's from the Climate Center. So that's it. Frederiek, the floor is yours. Welcome about significant climate scenarios for discharge in rivers.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, good afternoon to you all. As said, I'm Frederiek Sperna Weiland. I've been working for the past 15 years at Deltares, and I have a background in climate change. I'm involved in several EU projects on climate change, and I specifically focus on preparing discharge projections for the future for the Rhine and the Meuse. And that's also what I will be talking about with today. So as you all may know, last year the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change released its 6th assessment report. So they gave an update of what climate change has been observed and what climate change is to be expected for the future. And I want to give you some high-level messages from that report, from the policy for summary makers. So if we look at this map, it was prepared based on an analysis of observed temperatures and of observed hot extremes. Going from the left to the right, if you look at the hexagons, we go from the United States to Europe in the middle. And there we can see that entire Europe is colored red. So this indicates that there is clear observed increase in the hot extremes over the past. And it also confirmed that there is a human contribution to this increase. So today, this is one of the things that may have been clear to you already, but today we're interested in droughts. And especially, or at least me, I'm interested in agricultural and ecological droughts. So this is an analysis they also did, where they analyzed over the past 50 years whether there is a trend, an increase or decreasing trend in droughts. And again, when I look at the middle hexagons, I can see that Northern Europe and Eastern Europe and EU and EEU don't have a clear trend, but at the same time, the Mediterranean, MED, and Western Europe, WCE, do have an increasing trend in observed droughts for agriculture and ecology. And for the Mediterranean, there are even dots, 2 dots in the hexagon, and this indicates that humans are contributing to these increases in droughts. So by making and using water, we are actually increasing the drought conditions. This is a result of a work that was done in the EU project European Climate Projections, which we also took part. It was led by IAWR. And what you see on the map in the left is the river network of Europe. And here they compared what happens with the actual river flows if water use and climate change occur. So the left map shows the average conditions, and then it considers the water use. So the red colors indicate in which river water is used and in which rivers water use is actually decreasing the river flows. And you can see that that reaches up to a minus 50% of the river flow. So on an annual base, about 50% of the water is being used by people, by us. Then if we go to the middle map, we look at the impact of climate change. So this is just the river flow and taking into account future changes in precipitation. And there, for the northern part of Europe, you can actually see quite a nice picture because you can see that water availability will be increasing. But also for climate change, the water availability in parts of France, in UK and in Spain will be decreasing. Then when we combine water use and climate change, we end up in the map on the right. And there you can clearly see that for large parts of Europe, the map is colored red. And this indicates that in the future, both water use and climate change conditions will increase the drought conditions we experience. As said, I will be zooming in on the Rhine. And this is work that is done for the Commission of the Hydrology of the Rhine by Freiburg University. On the left, you can see the projections for precipitation during the summer half year. On top, you see the near future, in the bottom, you see the far future. And from both maps, you can clearly see that there will very likely be a decrease in summer precipitation, which will also increase the drought conditions in summer. Then the middle map shows the winter precipitation, and actually for the winter, increases in precipitation are projected. So if water is stored in the basin, that may help decrease droughts. Then on the right, the mean annual temperature, and that is clearly increasing, and it's increasing more towards the end of the century. One of the things that contributes to flow of the River Rhine during the summer months is the melting of snow and the melting of glaciers. And what this graph shows is that part of the mean annual discharge that originates from snow. So the average discharge of the Rhine is about 2,000 cubic meters per second. And actually, in 1980, about half of that originated from snowmelt. And you can see that over time, if we go from left to right on the x-axis, we move from 1980 to 2100. And we can clearly see that the contribution from snowmelt to the river discharge is halved. So also in summer months, there will be less snowmelt and there will be less contribution of snowmelt water to the river flows, decreasing those even more. Well, these are the Dutch climate scenarios for the Rhine. Those are the KNMI 14 scenarios. We're currently preparing the KNMI 23 scenarios. And we've worked on this together with the KNMI. And what you can clearly see that there are increases in discharge projected for the winter months on average, and that there decreases projected for the summer months on average. So the graph shows you the year from November to October, so the hydrological year, and you can see those increases in winter, decreases in summer. But there's also a lot of uncertainties. Although I would say that most scenarios agree on a decrease in summer discharge. Now, what do we know in advance when a dry summer is coming up? We can have a look at seasonal weather predictions, but we can also have a look at the snow water content in the Alps. This was work done by a colleague of mine, and then the spread in this graph shows for each year the snow water equivalent in the basin. So how much water is actually stored in snow within the Rhine basin. And it's graphs for the period 1991 to 2023. And for example, the year 2018 was very dry in the Netherlands. That is the red line in the graph. But currently we're on the black line in the graph. It's 2023 and we're actually having a very little snow within the basin. So also the snow contribution in summer will be really loaded here. So we depend a lot on precipitation that's upcoming in the coming months. Well, what do we experience in the Netherlands already, and which will be experienced more and more in the future? We have restrictions for irrigation water use. There are limitations for navigation. Due to low river flows, we have additional salt water coming in, and that's providing problems for drinking water supply. And there's restrictions for cooling water. So actually we need to work on buffers for fresh water. Now, take home message. We ourselves should be part of the change, because water use is really impacting the actual water availability and the drought conditions in the basin. And in the future, the seasonal outlooks can help us to get prepared in time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frederiek. Thank you, and lovely to have your take home messages as well at the end. That's always nice to sort of heading to the summary. I think for me, two things that were striking indeed, the element of human being, that people have a sort of a significant influence to that. And I think what was mentioned also during the UN conference in New York 2 weeks ago was that the hydrological cycle has been broken. And that's quite a strong statement. And I was also listening to your story that these, although there are uncertainties, that it will only increase the difference. So great for sharing that. And I know before into this webinar, there was already a lot of interaction between you and the other speakers. So I think there's food for thought to work on that together as well. Let me see if there are any questions, maybe for people that are listening. You can add them into the chat. And otherwise, so far for me, maybe as one of the questions, because I think the melting water with the snow is something. Do you foresee how easy sometimes nature is sort of, how to say that, forgiving? How easily will snow come back? And maybe it's also related to the question that Rob poses in the chat about the hydrological cycle, because I think that's sort of a global weather pattern where things are moving and suddenly things are not moving in the same direction anymore. So maybe you can sort of share a little bit about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I would say indeed that this part of the hydrological cycle has changed really a lot, and it's now impacting us. So in a way, I understand your remark that it's broken. So we see those increasing temperatures, and that means that in the Alps, our snow is melting too early in the year, and at the same time, there is less accumulation of a snowpack in winter. So that is something that in very cold years, it may be there, it may be recovered, but on the long term, with those increasing temperatures, it will disappear, or it will start disappearing and be much less, and is also contributing less to the flows.
Yeah. Rob, hope that answers a bit of your question. There's a lot more to share about that, but okay, no, thanks. A question from, let me see, Helene. Do predictions for discharge amount in the Netherlands also include buffer measures upstream?
No, currently very little. Also because our models do not yet have this either human interaction or very newly developed measures. But it also nicely links to the next talk where Wolfgang will be talking about those measures.
Yeah. Is that are there any other questions, or maybe that's a natural link to the next speaker? But and otherwise, if questions later pop up, then I think maybe, because then the dialogue starts. So I think it will be, for me, will be perfect at the end if we have more time at the end after the 3 presentations to see how they are interrelated. So I would say I would like to do this, but I think there's also the thing with the hands in the chat. But then thanks, Frederiek. Wonderful done. Great. Then I would like to introduce Wolfgang Deinlein. He's the managing director of the International Association of Waterworks in the Rhine basin. And they are working towards protecting the quality of drinking water resources so that the drinking water supply is possible using nature-based purification methods only. Wolfgang studied geology, sorry for that, at the University of Karlsruhe and works at the Stadtwerke Karlsruhe utility in the southern part of Germany, where the office is based. I will share the link of your organization in the chat as well, Wolfgang. But the floor is yours, and great to have you here.
Thanks a lot, Frodo, for the nice introduction and the invitation here to speak on the Amsterdam International Water Week webinar. I will now start and talk about, next slide, please. First thing is a short introduction again, and then I will talk about aspects of drought on drinking water supply in the Rhine Basin, and then on solutions at river basin level to increase resilience. Here we have a look at land use supporting water retention. That's the magic word, water retention, in the second part of my talk here. Next slide, please. Like announced, I'm managing director from IAWR, which consists of 3 member organizations in the upper, middle, and lower Rhine Basin. And IAWR's task is to tackle hazards for public drinking water supply. And so far we've been dealing a lot with water quality. And this is actually the first time that I'm talking about water quality. And I had an time to have an impression about what is going on. And I was quite surprised about the solutions which are actually available. And this will be on in the second half. And the problems in the Rhine Basin are pretty much the same problems in other river basins. So it's quite a good idea to team up. Next slides, please. And team up with other river basins, which are the Danube and the Elbe, Meuse, and Scheldt river basins. So this is called the ERM coalition, which is named after the first memorandum that the ERM coalition put out in 2020, the European River Memorandum. Goal is the protection of drinking water resources, which was complemented last year by the European Groundwater Memorandum. Next slide, please. So, aspects of drought on drinking water supply in the Rhine Basin. Next slides, please. I have just 2 slides for this chapter. The first slide is new risks and challenges. And first of all, I would like to highlight the effect that there is a deterioration of water quality just because of decreasing water quantity. So, for instance, concentrations triple if the same load of pollutants is discharged into only 1/3 of the amount of water. So this is a quite significant rise of concentrations of pollutants, which is accompanied with water amount and drought. And this is very particularly relevant for micropollutants, but also for salt concentrations. And we saw this effect last year in the terrible catastrophe at the River Oder, where the fish were dying because of salt concentrations and the algae which were growing because of that. And the underlying problem of this was actually this effect that I just described, that there is the water quality deterioration just because of little water in the river. New risks and challenges. There is the problem of saltwater intrusion near the coast in the IJsselmeer, upstream of the mouth of the lake, herring fleet, and the groundwater near the coast. Another problem is low water pressure due to high demand in remote areas. On the right hand, we see a picture of the water demand in Germany, which is actually the water annual demand. And we see 2003, 2018, from 2018 on higher demand. And this is much more if we look at the peak demand for days and the actual drought periods, there's a much higher increase. Then we have also an increase in pipe bursts because there are dried out soils, and this increases because of subsidence in the soil. Also, there are rising temperatures in the tap water in the water networks. And actually there's this twofold effect that there is shortages in water availability or temporary shortages, and at the same time there's growing demand and especially growing peak demand. And as well, there might be conflicts or are already conflicts with other users. Next slide, please. And what are the measures that are taken or that are planned? In Germany, it's a lot about interconnecting networks, interconnecting and long distance pipelines. In the Netherlands, there is a lot of plans about increased freshwater storage, regenton in the IJsselmeer, with a more comprehensive chloride monitoring, which is planned there, and some regional measures like partial opening of upstream Hagesteinweer in the lake to reduce chloride intrusion. This is in conflict with shipping because that's what the weir is there for. There is the possibility of closing downstream weir at Haringvliet sluices, but this is in conflict with migratory fish, which want to enter and migrate upstream. And also measures are taken to reduce water losses and, of course, to find new sources of drinking water, to increase capacity of existing waterworks and artificial groundwater recharge or even desalination. And of course, restricting water use, like Frederiek said, but this at the same time, we see rising demand, and this might result in a conflict as well. Next slide, please. So what are solutions available at river basin level to increase resilience, to support water retention? Next slide, please. First, I would like to talk about, next slide. I'd like to talk about the impact of agriculture. For agriculture, there's this astonishing number of 130% higher infiltration where there's organic farming compared to conventional farming. This is a result of a meta study. And if you look at the right, so it's 130% higher infiltration is like more than doubling infiltration. This is doubling water retention and increases soil water, plant available water. So there's also for crops, so there's less need for irrigation. There's conflicts with agriculture, and there's more groundwater recharge. And groundwater recharge is the base flow of rivers in drought. So groundwater recharge is very much the key to be more resilient. And when we look at the left side, there's conventional farming, which is resulting in higher surface runoff, which increases the risk of floods, and soil erosion, which is also a big problem, and the need for irrigation. So next slide, please. Why is this? Why is there higher infiltration in organic farming compared to conventional farming? There are 3 reasons given: soil cover with plants, especially with legumes, and much higher crop rotation. Pesticide-free farming leads to that earthworms and soil biology are thriving and in a good condition, and they're very important for the soil. Soil biology and soil biodiversity is responsible for the turnover in the soil. So the turnover of old plant material into nutrients and all that. That's really depending of biology. And there is less heavyweight agricultural machinery, and these have a very bad impact, especially in wet conditions. And approximately 1/4 of all soils in Europe and 43% of the soils in the Netherlands have critical high densities in the subsoil, indicating subsoil compaction. And subsoil compaction has to be regarded quite irreversible. It's below the depth of the tillage, and there's no real measure to counter this. So it's a really big problem which is arising with conventional agriculture. And it also reduces yields and reduces filter function in soils for pollutants for the groundwater. So it's very important for drinking water supply. And looking to the right-hand column, it's so soil is a very complex thing. There's better soil structure, soil health, because of more organic matter, more organic carbon humus content and biomass, which again also lead to lower carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and are considered as an important sink for carbon dioxide. And as well, there's higher soil porosity, of course, and higher aggregate stability, which lead to an increase in infiltration. Next slide, please. That's another effect which is possible for agricultural keyline structures, where there are you have a slope or a gradient, and then along the contour lines there is trees planted, which can be fruit trees, and these trees keep shadow and reduce wind erosion. And this is very important and very good measure, but very poorly applied so far. But this is a very effective measure against all these effects that I just described. Next slide, please. Now we're looking at the river basin level and landscapes. There is a study of the World Wildlife Fund Netherlands and Wetlands International, which basically says that natural water storage in groundwater is the base flow of rivers in drought, like I said, and natural water storage in groundwater. That's the way to do it, to store water in groundwater, because like Frederiek explained, we have more decreased rainfall in summer, and also the decrease because of the snow and glacier melt during summer. So where to store the groundwater, and it's very wise to store it, and where to store water for summer, and it's very wise to store this in the groundwater. It's much better for water quality also. It's the best thing to do for water quality. Next slide, please. And so this is also from this study from Wetlands International. What can be done apart from agriculture? We can look at number one, give room for the rivers and floodplains. Number two is green cities or sponge cities. It's really interesting as well. I don't have much time for this, but it's a worldwide movement, and it goes by very different names, like green or blue-green infrastructure, or low impact infrastructure in the United States, or also in Canada it's called nature-based solution. And when we look at number four, there is very important measure restoring wetland sponges. And number five, it's the woods and the forests, when conserving and preserving woods and converting coniferous to deciduous forests, which are adapt to the location. Very important. But also, next slide, please. It's very important to adopt nature-based solutions. That's in a wider sense. That's what all these measures have in common. And next slide, please, is like current today situation is that there are tracks in the forests. Beside the tracks, there are ditches, and there are these roads for the transportation of cut trees. And this is like a drainage system in the woods. And this water is missing in times of drought. Next slide, please. When the water is missing and forests are dying, it's quite a large impact of the drought in 2018 that we can observe, and considerable amount of forests that have died. And so my take-home message would be speeding up transformation of agriculture, of forestry, and of urban planning. Also restoration of wetlands as nature-based solutions. So this is beneficial for water, climate, and biodiversity, for the main problems that we have on this planet right now, besides pollution. So this is multiple benefits, and there's no real conflict in the targets. So this what should be done. And last slide, please, is saying that I heard at the United Nations Water Conference. The first thing rain washes away is the memory of the drought. I hope it's not like that for this webinar, and would like to close it here. Thanks.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Much appreciated. So what you were saying, the last slide, I think it was a nice one. You mentioned it was in New York. The first thing rain washes away is the memory of the drought. Are we so hard by the memory? And do you know where this was coming from, this quote? Or
I was wondering where I heard it in the conference in New York, but I couldn't actually remember. I thought it was some part of maybe Spain or some Spanish-speaking part of the earth. Yeah. And today I just maybe that's an answer. Today I read another saying, it's a German saying, that a severe drought is followed by heavy rains and heavy rainfall. So this might be also in common with this to forget it because you're conflicted with the next, and they're quite interlinked actually, drought and heavy rainfall.
Yeah. No, thanks a lot. And I like the visual representation of the water systems, and I like also I think one of the speakers, Pete Fillet from Australia, is also on board, because he made this sort of comparison also with cities. Because I think what you said with green cities, sponge cities, the different names for that, but also the water systems. I would like to see if Pete can maybe ask his question or maybe step in later as well. But one of the things that struck me, Wolfgang, was the last thing. It sounds so wonderful. It's about the transformation. Huh? Yeah, so it ticks all the boxes. So nature-based solutions. So why are we not doing it?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I think it's three reasons. Like one reason might be that we are thinking of complicated solutions and very high efforts how to achieve it. And maybe if you could open the presentation again. My presentation is one reason why we're not doing it could be because it's low cost, and low cost doesn't have much money to earn and to gain, and so there's the driver missing on the political stage who wants to have this implemented. And Carla, could you open my presentation and go to slide 11? Would that be possible? One reason also is, I think, because some of these solutions are kind of going back to the past. When we look at this slide, slide, we have these keyline structures here, and we go 2 slides back to slide number 9, and we look at the picture of Van Gogh in 1890. Was a picture painted in Auvers-sur-Oise, north of Paris. And when we look at the slope and the structures in that picture, it's not trees which are giving the key line, but it's the field structure, which is looking like as if it's giving key lines. So, well, it's not the kind of progress that we're expecting. And but in this case, actually going back might be the way forward.
Yeah. Good point. So I think it's definitely, I think the visual representation to sort of the beauty of the landscape, the value of water, the value of green. I think what Pete was saying in the chat as well, it's a people-based issue. So is the intent truly that we would like to make that change? Do we truly value water? So I think it's in most cases it's more a leadership issue. And a sort of, if you would listen maybe to the community and the people, that's I think what Pete mentioned as well, the people that living in these dry areas, so the people that has had severe flooding in their house or in their agriculture, in their farming, they know, they feel the pain. So I think it's really sort of, why are we not moving? I think that's also probably sort of related to the action agenda and so forth. Let me know, Pete, if you would like to step in. I think you can unmute, but otherwise I see some nice other messages about some takeaway messages, also about the role of technology and so. Are there any other questions for, I think here, Bernard? There are a lot of experiments, but it's difficult to find business models for scaling up these kind of experiments. The gains and pains are not equally distributed. I think that's sort of a nice summary as well. Is it so? Wolfgang, can you see this as a business case, and who's maybe the owner of that business case? Because then probably it becomes complex.
Well, like we see organic farming, this is quite subsidized, and there's going together of farmers, but this is really not what they are up to fight for extension of their model, because they're farmers, you know, and dealing with other things. And like I said, the sponge city model is quite a worldwide movement, actually, so I have quite hopes in that. What is with the woods, it's, I don't know, wood management is a state thing usually, and here the change has to come within the system and of forest management and wood management. And for wetlands, this is a very, very difficult topic, because there's really no advocacy for that. For wetlands.
So it's really sort of as a statement to the whole group here. Why do we like water? Well, because it's complex, that a lot of stakeholders, and we need to understand the system. Otherwise we cannot change it. So the ownership and the incentives are different places, differently organized. Okay, I would like, in light of time, maybe at Wolfgang at the end to continue, but then thanks one more time. Big hands. Then I would like to move to, probably, if we talk about drought and a city and the people living in the city who experienced drought as sort of day zero, as in everybody knows, most likely. The Solutions in the Cape Town area by Bettina Koelle. She's from the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, and she's a senior learning specialist, and she's passionate about experimental learning. I think that's what we need, and creative, innovative forms of effective dialogue. And Piet, I know you're around, you would love this. And she has been designing and facilitating a range of large and small virtual and face-to-face dialogues. And she's driven by her passion for people and learning, co-produce different processes. So Bettina, great to have you here. I know that you're also fighting with some, let's see. So take care, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Frodo. And sorry if my voice is a little feeble sometimes. I'm fighting COVID. It's not over for some of us. So I would like to take you now on a journey to Cape Town in the year 2018. And I'll talk a little bit about the background of why this drought happened and what happened before people started getting worried about day zero. Then I will share some examples of what was the government response and the civil action that was triggered by the drought in 2018, and then put that into a context of longer term resilience that is needed for cities. Next slide, please. This is Cape Town, and Cape Town, for those of you who have not been, it's a bustling metropolis. It has a vibrant agricultural sector. It has a vibrant industry sector. It has a large tourism industry, and is really the most important economic hub in the Western Cape province. Next slide, please. And what happened in 2018 is that Cape Town is supplied with drinking water nearly exclusively by open surface dams in the mountain regions. And because of recurring failing rains, the dam levels were incredibly low in February 2018. In fact, people started to get worried in December 2017 already, because this is our summer. It's where in the winter rainfall area, no rain is to be expected. So the dam levels were low, and there was concern if the winter rains would actually compensate for the low dam levels, or if we would head towards a crisis, which was coined day zero, which means you open the taps in the city and no water will come out. Next slide, please. Here you can see Cape Town is here at the tip in the peninsula, and you can see the mountainous areas. And if you go to the next slide, please, you can see the mountainous areas in green, and you can see the blue dots being all the regional dams. So these dams are up in the mountains. The water gravitates to the city to feed an increasingly hungry city with drinking water and an increasingly active and thirsty agricultural sector in the Western Cape province. Next slide, please. As you can see here, the annual water demand has actually been curbed by limited supply already from the 1990s, where with unconstrained growth, we would have seen a much higher increase in consumption. So water constraints have already been around for some time and are certainly something that is not new to Cape Townians. Next slide, please. But what happened in 2018 is that you can see here the actual observed dam levels were very close to the failure zone that you can see here in pink. In the dry months of January, February, and March, and then easing off a little bit. And basically the failure zone is day 0, where you open the tap and no water comes out. This is what happened. And then you can see the winter rains were fortunately coming and bringing some relief in about June in 2018. Next slide, please. You can see here the predictions are not positive when it comes to the annual rainfall that is expected in the catchment area of these dams. Next slide, please. And you can see here that actually in 2017 already the dam levels were lower than expected and even lower in beginning of 2018. Next slide. And so the government called people together and said, what are we expecting? Do we need to plan for a water crisis, or can we spend the funds for other urgent development needs and support people in poverty, to support more formal housing projects, to deal with the housing crisis in Cape Town and other really pressing issues? And you can see here that the bottom line here was actually one by scientists where they said, we think we need to prepare for this. And a lot of the decision makers said, we actually think the blue one looks like it's more likely, so maybe it's comforting and not a problem. Next slide. So what happened was that we need to prepare for drier and warmer futures. I think we heard from Frederiek. We could see Southern Africa is also impacted by recurring droughts and lower rainfall. We also saw that in Wolfgang's presentation that water-related measures often have trade-offs. And so I'm going to talk about some of the measures that were put in place in Cape Town. Next slide. So public pools were closing. And in fact, there was quite a lot of anxiety and panic about what would happen to the social fabric if the taps would run dry in the city, seeing that water is such a crucial and important resource for everyone in the city. Next slide. We'll go through these quite quickly, Carla. So there was a big campaign to say, how can we avoid day 0? And next slide. And there was a running count to say day 0 is this date in the future, and the date would shift forward or backwards depending on rainfall and depending on consumption patterns. So people were glued to their screens and to social media to see when day 0 would come. And you can see here from 87 liters a day, lots of campaigns there to say, how can you make do for your entire needs of private water use with 87 liters a day? It went down to 50 liters a day. You can see in the next slide. Lots of measures were put in place to, next slide, please, to, for example, stop all public taps and replace them with hand sanitizers. That was way before COVID made hand sanitizers very popular. And big banners, and even at the airport, don't waste a drop of water. We have a water crisis in Cape Town. You could see it everywhere. The communication strategy was huge. Next slide. And someone said in the chat, how about a 2-minute timer in the shower? So there was an initiative where a lot of famous musicians from South Africa recorded 2-minute versions of famous songs to help people time their showers to 2 minutes and restrict water consumption. Next slide. And there was also a mapping initiative saying, can we actually track and oust the households that are still having excessively high water consumption while we are in a water crisis? And this is an updated map. You can see they're all green, but if they were red or orange, you would actually be ousted as a household with very high and excessive water consumption. Next slide. This is not new. Already in 1990, there was an article in the Cape Times, a South African Cape Town newspaper, saying the city will run out of water in 17 years. There have been repeated warnings, and this is where we are facing always competing interests and priorities in terms of upgrading infrastructure, looking at adaptation, and also ensuring that we take care of most vulnerable groups in the urban spaces in terms of formal settlements and relief of poverty. Next slide. So what happened was that the water levels returned, the rains returned, there was some relief. People stopped showering in buckets and not flushing their toilets. And I wanted to just quickly summarize the strategy that the government put in place. Next one. So there were government restriction levels. There was these huge communication campaigns. Also, the water pressure was reduced so that water would run slower. Households with excessive use had household flow regulators installed where it would just be a trickle of water being released. Punitive tariffs were punishing high water users. There were adaptation, and that links a little bit to Wolfgang's presentation on adaptation and looking at how can we promote water smart cities in the beginning, but the crisis was very acute. And I think this is also the question in the chat, the agricultural water restrictions were 60%. It had a huge impact on the agricultural sector and on employment in the agricultural sector. Next slide. So what this means is collaboration actually happened here, not as a technical or engineering solution, but really because all sectors worked together and actually made a combined enormous effort to really save the day and to postpone day zero until the rains came. And so day zero was never experienced. And I think one of the key elements here was really effective communication, really very focused lobbying around how water should be restricted, and also, of course, enforcement of those measures. Next slide. So why is this challenging? Because often when we look at timelines, we learn from past events. We maybe talk about the current situation, and we sometimes really struggle to look at the long-term future because it seems really far away. However, when we talk about infrastructure and upgrading of infrastructure, nature-based solutions to make cities more resilient, we really need to understand the entire spectrum of past events and long-term futures as predicted in the forecasts to really come up with resilient and robust strategies that need time to implement and also sometimes considerable resources. And I'll end with this slide here and say that actually what is important here is really that we need to think about a positive future that we would like to create and not just talk about all the terrible things that could happen, but rather to say, what are the cities that we would like to live in? How would we like to manage water resources? And I think Wolfgang's presentation gave a couple of clues, and I think the civil society action gave some more clues. So I hope these were some inspiring thoughts from Cape Town. I'll leave it at this, Carla, and just want to say that, of course, Cape Town has now managed the drought. However, we had COVID, of course, with a huge impact on the economy and on tourism, and we are also having rolling power cuts. So I think we also need to talk at systems level at cascading and compound risk, and not just as drought, but drought in the bigger system. Frodo, I leave it at that. Over to you.
Thanks, Bettina. Thanks. I was sort of more than enjoying, because indeed you were touching upon the people, the human science, and the transition. What Wolfgang was also mentioning. How do you make that change happen? And why do we only act if the day zero occurs? I think there are some questions here as well. So what has been done since the crisis to avoid, mitigate the similar situation in the past? For, let's say, simulation for the future. Because I think it's nice, the news article that you shared with sort of the newspaper in 17 years it will come. Now they were 1 year too late. But is it still on the agenda, or is it indeed what you're saying, the communication, the collaboration? And what I truly like about your story is the positive story, because I think we all would like to live in a water-wise city or in a water resilient city. I think that's the vision that everybody has for a city or water system. And mostly we only hear the message what we cannot do. You cannot do this, you cannot do that. So is there any sort of lesson that you can sort of afterwards? Because is the pressure now on? Is agriculture up again? Because I think you said they say the citizens and the agriculture save today. I do not know about industry, if you can say something about it. But what is the current state related to, besides energy and so what you mentioned?
So in 2018, this was the topic in front of everyone's mind. Industry did a massive effort as well. And I think that was really truly unique, is that really every single sector in the Western Cape was pulling their weight, did huge investments to close taps, reinstall or install hand sanitizers, etc. And so I think there was really a massive effort and a group undertaking there. There are quite a few scientific papers also understanding and looking at how sustainable this change is of saving water. Yeah. And so I think one thing that one needs to say, though, is 2018 was followed by a reasonable rain year in 2019 and then by the pandemic in 2020, which eclipsed a lot of the questions. So the one status, the one permanent was the hand sanitizing aspect of things, and I think it really eclipsed a lot of the crisis. The rolling power blackouts that we're experiencing at the moment, the load shedding, also has problem and feedback loop with water provision, because a lot of the water needs to be pumped to be able to be provided by citizens or to agriculture. And that, of course, is another complication. So that's why I was saying systems perspectives are complicated, they're complex, and there are often not very practical, I think, when engineers want to get to work. But I really think we need to look at systems perspective to tackle these challenges that we are facing now and especially in the future.
All right, thanks, Bettina. Maybe I would say maybe I can do the raise hands with people who are a system thinker. Do we have any sort of, because I think that's a profession and expertise as well. So one of the takeaways for me is definitely we need system thinkers and change managers and facilitators on that. So I see at least 2 hands. So I think we're good. We're in good hands at least to have somebody around. But I think we need more. Because I think that's the fact. We need the right engineers and the people that are really able to manage the water system. And if I can quote one of my colleagues, his name is Maarten. He works at the Water Authority and the Water Utility of Amsterdam, and he always says the one thing that we all need is curiosity. We will never be able to manage. We can never control a water system. And we should like that. It's the DNA of the people working in the system. Stay curious, learn, and be surprised in the positive way. Are there any other questions or people that we can give the floor? Because I'm sort of ending up with the last 5 minutes, and I would like to sort of have a need to have my role properly done. There's a question. Let me see if I can read it right away. No, I think afterwards, I think the presentations will be shared. I think that's a good thing to highlight. The contact details will be highlights. I think that's something to continue the conversation. We will like to do another webinar on this one. But if there is any question, I think rainwater catchment systems have been implemented on large scale. Which great initiative public-private has been taken. I think that's also one of these topics, how public and private can work together. Yeah, is there something as experience? I think Wolfgang, what you mentioned as well, the different owners, the different managers of the different systems. Is that something, how to bring them around the table? Because it always sounds easier than it is. I think you're still muted. And then maybe Frederiek, for you the same, sort of how is public and private in this sense in working in a water system? How is that maybe sort of, if you have an example, how to improve that, or maybe that you say, no, I'm pretty satisfied with it.
Well, in the chat, there was this question about the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy of the EU, and I wrote some responses on that. That was a very big disappointment because this is, like you say, this is public funding, and this should be, not used. It should be used for sustainable solutions, and this was quite a big disappointment that the CAP failed in finding a European-wide solution, and left it to the member states to define some CAP national strategic plans on this. But we have a European competition, and we should find European transformation solutions for the agricultural question.
All right, thanks for that, Wolfgang. Before Frederiek, sorry, I would like to sort of make sure that Hans Versteeg also has a hand or maybe a question. So then I would like to see if she would like to. I think you can unmute and share your question if that's possible. And if not, or in between, maybe Frederiek, maybe you can sort of share your last point on maybe also the collaboration between in a system. I think what you shared as well, or a final observation if that's more convenient for you. Listening to the previous speakers and the questions that came up. You're mute as well.
I think on a policy level and a national level, there are many things that can be implemented and that can be said, but it's really also, especially in periods of drought, you still surprised about how much water people can use. So I think there needs to be a two-way change.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. No, goes hand in hand. Yeah. Hans, maybe share your question in the chat, and then maybe we can share the question to the presenters. I would like to sort of, in time management, I would like to thank everybody for the active contribution in the chat. We were all trying to do some multitasking. I would like to thank the speakers, Bettina, Frederiek, Wolfgang. I would like to thank Maartje, Monique, Carla, and the others if I'm forgetting them. But thanks for hosting this. At the end of this month, there's an abstract call for papers and workshop for the Amsterdam International Water Week that will be happening in November. And if you like, you can chat. It can continue, but we will close the recording and the session here. Looking forward to continue this conversation as it's much needed. I think we started with the hydrological cycle that's broken and what does mean. Let's explore that. But I think we need to understand the system. Hopefully we can share that collaboration together and leave us behind with a positive story about the water story of the different basins and cities that are part of what we all need, water. So the chat goes on here. So thank you all. Have a great day and hopefully see you soon again.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Goodbye. All the best.